What probably comes to our minds when we think of the concept of horror is mostly that of imagery and storytelling presented to us through the medium of movies, TV shows, literature, photography, art, and even video games. But rarely does music come up in this discussion of horror. When music is discussed when talking about horror, it's usually in regards to a soundtrack for a movie or video game. But rarely does a particular genre outside of a soundtrack get discussed when talking about horror in music. And if there's any genre of music that doesn't get this attention, it's certainly that of hip-hop. On a historical and superficial level at least. Hip-hop is by far the most disturbing genre of music out there, with some of the most popular and influential works being about violence and murder. In the mid-1980s, rappers and rap groups like NWA, the 2 Live Crew, and Ice-T literally shocked the nation to its core with the level of violence and profanity that appeared in their work, with these same themes being present in modern-day hip-hop. Of course, this doesn't mean that all hip-hop is like this, and viewing all hip-hop in this manner is quite stereotypical and a rather ignorant way of viewing an entire genre of music in general. But for a while, this was what most people thought when viewing hip-hop as a whole. Hip-hop comes from many places in the world, but in the 90s, the 2 main posers that were duking it out in terms of the status in the genre were of course the East Coast and the West Coast. But while this battle between the two was taking up the spotlight, the Dirty South was just chilling in the back and establishing their own styles. But out of the whole South, it was Memphis, Tennessee that would establish the most distinct of these styles, mainly through the use of horror as their primary aesthetics. The use of horror imagery in hip-hop was nothing new at the time, but Memphis would take it to a whole nother level, whether it be a group as well known as the 3 6 Mafia or a producer as obscure as Tommy Wright III. The Memphis hip-hop scene would develop its own aesthetics around the subject of horror in the mid-90s, using primitive music technology paired with dark and disturbing lyrics to create an overall haunting vibe out of what would be banger tracks. The use of cheap drum machines and recording equipment, the repetitive drum loops and poor audio mixing, and the dim and insightful storytelling lends these songs, mixtapes, and albums a special place in hip-hop history. Many of these horror-like imageries that were present in these songs was a direct reflection of the fears and anxieties of youth who lived in Memphis at the time, which in the 90s was one of the biggest murder capitals in the United States. It wasn't until the 2000s when Memphis would truly get the recognition that they deserved in hip-hop, with the previously mentioned 3 6 Mafia becoming the first hip-hop group in history to win an Oscar for Best Original Song. And it wasn't until the 2010s when the concept of horror and hip-hop that were established in 90s Memphis rap were being paid tribute to by the newest of upcoming artists through the exposure of the internet. Many of these rather obscure tracks that were once relegated to personal collections and flea markets were finding new homes on the internet. But out of the literally dozens of 90s Memphis rap tapes out there are 8 of which that have become infamous, and not only those that are interested in Memphis rap, but also those who are concerned with that of the paranormal matter. These 8 tapes are said to be literally cursed, soaked in the blood of those who were demonically sacrificed for the artist's own powers, and that those who listen to these said tapes are also equally as cursed. This is the haunting tale of the Memphis Rap Sigils. Like many mysteries on the internet, the Memphis Rap Sigils can be traced all the way back to 4chan. On August 19, 2017, a user on 4chan's X board would post an iceberg chart listing off general conspiracy theories. And for those unaware of what an iceberg chart is, it's a chart displayed in an image format that hosts interesting facts on a certain subject. And the deeper you go down the iceberg, the facts get more obscure and disturbing. Though this was eventually made popular in 2020, boards like 4chan have been using these types of charts for years, especially when it came to information on the X board. In fact, this was one of the first so-called conspiracy charts on the internet as a whole. A type of iceberg chart that has become one of the most popular in terms of its topics and themes. This chart contains your standard conspiracy theories, like Big Pharma, MKUltra, Pizzagate, 9/11 was an inside job, Flat Earth, chemtrails, Area 51, etc. But there was also some pop culture conspiracy theories thrown into the mix as well, such as OJ covering up for Son, Clinton body double, Stephen King killed John Lennon, Solange equals Beyonce's daughter. Paul is Dead and Gucci Mane clone, my personal favorite. However, close to the bottom of the chart, there's an entry called the Memphis Rap Sigils, which confused many on the forum who wanted clarification on this, such as this user who posted, "Someone help me out with some of these. Memphis Rap Sigils. Big Memphis rap fan, really interested as to what this is." About 10 minutes later, a fellow user responded with the answers. Memphis Rap Sigils, alleged occult connections, involving several influential artists and producers in the 90s Memphis hip-hop scene. Another user responded to this question saying, "Memphis Rap Sigils. Could only find this, but it barely seems related. And there's always been rumors about Children of the Corn, Criminal Maine, etc." The user then links a 2015 interview podcast by Illuminati author and researcher Isaac Weishaupt, in which the episode he interviews William Ramsey, an expert on the West Memphis 3 murders. The West Memphis 3 is an important part of the story when it comes to the demonic inspiration for not only the Memphis Rap Sigils, but also the horror aesthetics of the Memphis rap scene. So I'll try to summarize it to the best of my ability. The West Memphis 3 refers to 3 teenagers who were suspected of murdering 3 boys in 1993 in West Memphis, Arkansas. These 3 were convicted and sentenced to life until 2007, 10, and ultimately 11, when new DNA evidence was discovered that essentially proved their innocence, with all of them being released in 2011. Anyways, the murders of these 3 boys were highly suspected to be some sort of satanic ritual, especially in the eyes of the media at the time, with Ramsey asserting that there was no question that these murders weren't a satanic ritual, and that these teenagers who were convicted in this crime, specifically that of Damon Eccles, is a murderer and a devil worshipper. However, such opinions seem to have very little backing when compared to the legitimate evidence proving him innocent. The concept of a satanic ritual and or human sacrifice is going to be an apparent theme of not only the Memphis Rap Sigils, but also the overall satanic practices in Memphis rap as a whole. So keep this case in mind for later, as it does come up quite a bit when talking about this. Anyways, as this post on 4chan started to gain traction, so too did the concept of the Memphis Rap Sigils, with this topic being a common occurrence on 4chan's X board, such as this post by a user who clarifies this whole conspiracy, saying, "Both these tapes, if you can find the originals, have what you're looking for. The idea is sort of that because the artists and producers committed several murders, and the locations where they took place holds a lot of leftover soul energy from the lives that were taken. The lingering energy of known tragedies in the area goes as far back as the history of the United States, with some big Indian massacres, then on to slavery, then Civil War, and then about 100 years more of violence until you get to the 1990s, where Memphis was within the top 5 murder capitals in the country, I believe. Basically, if you believe in the Luciferian idea that it's possible to take a life and manifest that energy into something that becomes real in a sort of ritual, there would be some kind of medium between the spirit world and the world we know to be true. The life energy, the death energy, the demon, and the magnetic taping in a cassette. The 2 links that the user posted were 2 YouTube videos containing songs from the Sigils, one being the song Hellraiser by Maniac, and the other being the Going Undercover mixtape by Lil Ramsey. Anyways, this post in particular was the first time that the overall concept of the Memphis Rap Sigils was explained somewhat in detail. Basically explained that the soul creators of these tapes used the soul energy of their victims and embedded them onto these cassette recordings, in a Luciferian-like ritual. But this of course then raises another question for most people. What is a sigil and how is it created? According to Wikipedia, a sigil refers to a symbolic representation of a practitioner's desired outcome, especially in relation to chaos magic, also referred to as success magic or result-based magic. And if you're still kind of confused on the concept of a sigil, then I would just suggest to think about something like a voodoo doll, for example. I think that's the simplest way of explaining it. Anyways, sigils were mostly popular during the medieval era, with those sigils representing either an angel or a demon, which could be used to ritual summon the particular being through a particular power. Essentially, to create a sigil, you need an everyday physical object/symbol, and a type of power to charge its energy, with one of the most effective sources of power being that of sacrifice, which in this case the artists need to become rich and famous and shit, which is the motivation behind it, so to say. So there, we basically have a simple recipe on how to create a Memphis Rap Sigil. To quote directly from the X-Files of Rap on this topic in particular, the steps go as followed. 1. Murder somebody. 2. Record it. 3. Chop up the audio and sample it. 4. Return to murder scene. 5. Rap with your buddies over the murder beat. 6. Put it on a mixtape. 7. Sigil created. 8. Sell the mixtape. 9. People listen to it. 10. Sigil charged. 11. Blank. 12. Profit. From there, whatever they wish now has enough energy to manifest itself into reality. Essentially, these 8 tapes allegedly contain audio samples of their victims' murders, and or samples from snuff films. And this in turn is what gives the tapes and their creators their powers. If you need an actual real-life example of this sort of sampling practice, in 2016, artist JPEG Mafia released a song called I Just Killed a Cop, Now I'm Horny, in which the beginning of the song samples an actual dash cam recording of a police officer getting killed. Anyways, we already know 2 of the tapes in the Memphis Rap Sigil lore, but when did the other 6 get discovered? In October of 2017, a user on 4chan responded to an OP's question about the Memphis Rap Sigils, saying, "The Memphis Rap Sigils refers to the worship of 8 tracks that had mysterious properties imbued into them via horrorcore Memphis hip-hop, such as my copy of H.O.H of Destruction." To my knowledge, this was the first time that anybody specifically said there were 8 tapes in question. Later on a YouTube comment, a user posted 5 of the 8 confirmed tapes, saying that NOD's H.O.H of Destruction, Maniac's The World of a Psycho, Lil Ramsey's Going Undercover, H.O.H's Living in a Casket, and Psycho's The Return of Psycho were all part of the lore. The user also mentions that 4 other tapes could also be part of this, though he admits this is unconfirmed. But one of these tapes would end up being part of the official sigils, that being Children of the Corn's 1995 tape, The Single. It's unknown where and when the 2 other tapes were decided as being part of the sigils. My guess is that they were probably discussed on a 4chan thread or something. And it's even unknown whether a poster or talking about a specific song on the tapes, or the overall tapes themselves. But for simplicity's sake, I'll be covering the tapes as a whole. Generally speaking, the 8 tapes in question that are commonly referred to as part of the Memphis Rap Sigils are as followed. 10 Wanted Men's 1995 album Wanted Dead or Alive, Children of the Corn's 1995 album The Single, Maniac's 1994 album The World of a Psycho, Lil Ramsey's 1994 album Going Undercover, Halls of Hell's 1995 album Living in a Casket, H.O.H of Destruction's 1996 self-titled album, Mr. Tinimaine's 1995 album 1995, and Psycho's 1995 album The Return of Psycho. Some people also consider many of Kupsta Kanicka's early work, as well as the album Demons Taking Over Me by N-Word Creep, to be part of the sigils as well, but aren't officially considered to be part of the sigils. I also want to give an honorable mention to N-Words Don't Die Part 1 by DJ Fella, though again I won't be covering it. Anyways, let's break down why these 8 tapes are so bone-chillingly frightening, if they even are at all. Are these tapes as horrifying as people say that they are? Or are they just terribly misunderstood? Well, I guess we'll find out together.
Don't start no shit, won't be no shit. Don't start no shit, won't be no shit.
So our first tape is 10 Wanted Men's 1995 album Wanted Dead or Alive. This group was headed by famed Memphis hip-hop producer Tommy Wright III, known for his underground and crude way of producing. Anyways, there isn't anything out of the ordinary when it comes to this album in particular, as it sounds like many of its contemporaries. The album has a lot of bangers on it, like Magnolia Meets 4, Local For Real, Junkie Junk, Wanted Dead or Alive, All About That Cash, Gangsta Bitch, No Love For Hoes. Really, the whole album is pretty good if you're into it. My favorite track on the album is actually Junkie Junk, as the creepy beat mixed with the story of the lyrics perfectly encapsulating the creepy vibes that these sort of tapes elicit.
On my block selling rocks, handful, take your pick. You ain't got no money, give me your car so I can ball it, bitch.
Honorable mentions also goes out to both All About That Cash and No Love For Hoes, as the beats for those tracks are also really creepy.
No bitch that can't be pimped, ain't no hoe that can't be hoed. They're everlasting pimpin', I speed up on them, have them sound, horn blowing up, constantly beeping. Why you calling that be creeping? The game I speak, the niggas the trick. All the time she jockin' my dick.
Tommy Wright III has this talent of turning what would be creepy samples into club bangers, as all the beats on this are really good and unique. It has some creepy sounding beats here and there, and it has an eerie intro, and it has your typical demonic referencing or dark lyrics. But overall, this album isn't anything I would consider scary or cursed. Well, besides the creepy mixtape cover of Tommy Wright III in a coffin. And just for simplicity's sake, I won't be going over the particular lyrics in each of these tapes, because one, most of these disturbing lyrics deal with the same stuff, i.e. murder, mental illness, and satanic stuff, so to go through each of the lyrics would just be repetitive. Two is that I simply don't have the time to go through each as illustrated, so consider it lucky if you see a screenshot of some of the lyrics. 3 is that many of these lyrics are pretty cliche and somewhat stereotypical of the concept of horror in general, if that makes any sense. And 4, the power of these tapes mostly comes from the production value, or at least for me it does. Anyways, there's a track called Four Corners Part 3, and this concept of the four corners is going to be present in further conspiracy theories around not only this album, but also the rest of the tapes going forward. I'll talk about that in just a second, but just keep that concept in mind for later. Anyways though, this is a pretty good and obscure album, but it's nothing scary aside from creepy beats here and there. Our next tape is Children of the Corn's 1995 album, The Single. The group obviously got their name from the Stephen King short story, and later film series of the same name. You know, the one where the kids kill all the adults and shit. There's actually 2 versions of this album out there on the internet. The original 1995 one is of lower quality, and has only 10 tracks, while the recently re-released 2020 version by SIC Records is in better quality and has 14 tracks. In my personal opinion, this is probably the scariest out of the whole bunch, mostly due to its creepy instrumentals, disturbing samples, deep pitch shifted vocals, and overall low quality. But this also might be my personal favorite out of all the sigils for these very reasons. If you only have time to listen to one of these albums and want something scary for Halloween, make it this one. I wouldn't say that there's any particular bangers on this album, as the whole tape is pretty fucking creepy, but the most infamous out of all these tracks is Deep Into the Woods, due to its repetitive hook and droning sample.
Deep into the woods, deep into the woods, deep into the woods.
The lyrics aren't anything out of the ordinary, well, at least when talking about the tapes as a whole, but the production on this tape is what makes it so creepy. The audio mixing is really bad. Sometimes the left or right side of the headphones will go out, even in the remastered version, but this only further adds to the creepiness of the album. Out of all these albums, this one actually has the most screaming in the background. Some of it is pretty faint, especially when listening to the original 1995 version, but you can still definitely hear them. The screams do vary in realism though. Some of them sound straight out of a stock sound effects pack, and some actually sound organic and real, most likely taken from a movie or even their victims if you choose to believe that. At some moments the sound effects sound like something you'd hear in the Haunted Mansion ride at Disney, and other times it sounds straight out of a forgotten snuff film or something like that. If I had to choose the scariest tracks on the album, it would probably be Just Wanna Know Mix, Suffer, and Reality Got a Hand on Me. Those samples are just so fucking creepy. It also reminds me of a vaporwave style track by Infinity Frequencies, Luxury Elite, Telepath, or Hong Kong Express, specifically in the way that they sample. My personal favorite track on the album has to be the bonus track Devil Shit, as the instrumental and flow is very relaxing and calming compared to the rest of the album, and is more in line with traditional Memphis hip hop of the time. The beat was taken from Graveyard Productions' song of the same name, so it's not entirely original. In fact, this track and this album are both produced by the same person, Lil Grim, which is something to also take notes on as this video continues, because you're gonna see a lot of the same artists and producers on a lot of these tapes. Another honorable mention goes out to Black Magic. That track is also pretty fire as well. Ironically, for the most scary tape out of the bunch, it has the least creepy of all the covers. And in my opinion, the cover just looks very stock. especially in the 2020 remaster, which digitally recreated the cover from the ground up. Overall, while this album is far from being critically the best out of the bunch, and most of the songs aren't those that you can just simply jam to, I'd actually highly recommend this album for anyone who doesn't have time to experience each of the Memphis Rap Sigils, as I feel like this tape is the one that best exemplifies the conspiracy, and it might even scare you in the process.
Man, Maniac, I'm finna go and drop some of this psycho shit on this motherfucker, dog.
The next tape that we got is Maniac's 1994 album, The World of a Psycho. First and foremost, the cover of this one is my favorite out of the bunch, just because of how creepy it is. Like, you have this crappy photo of some kid in a tux wearing a crown, sporting a cane, in this makeshift throne room that has plastic wrapping all over the furniture and red spandex as the red carpet. The tape cover radiates this haunted vibe, and to be honest, this was the photo that got me interested in the Memphis Rap Sigils as a whole because of how striking it is. Sad to say, I can't really say the same for the album itself, as it's actually quite generic when compared to something like the single. This album is neither creepy or terrifying in both its beats and lyrics. And aside from the low quality rip of the tape itself, and the backstory behind the sigils, I would hardly classify this tape as creepy. The only track I would consider creepy would be the track Hellraiser, as it has a really creepy droney instrumental and somewhat disturbing lyrics about murder.
Snap, crackle, pop, you got drop with the 9 Glock. Niggas, you better be watching your back when you fuck them with a psycho jock. Niggas get grabbed and get stabbed with the fucking shank. You better think when you're fucking with niggas that is hot as a tank.
In fact, as stated previously, this song in particular is considered to be part of the sigil separately when compared to the rest of the album, as the rest of the album isn't that creepy, aside from the low quality sampling and your generic lyrics about murder and shit. But just because it isn't creepy doesn't mean it's not good, and I'd argue that some of the verses by Maniac are actually really good, but sometimes the aggressive in-your-face lyrics clash with the rather chill instrumentals.
The psycho will kill it, you see I'm straight from the orange mound. I'm sending a message to let you know I don't fuck around. We gangsters are type to see, we hang like a family. So bitch don't make me mad because I cause a catastrophe.
My favorite tracks on the album are Psychopathic Madmen, Twilight Zone, World of a Psycho, Pimps Don't Play, Pimpin' These Hoes, and the outro, as all of these tracks again have this repetitive early vaporwave-esque way of sampling obscure material. It's a real joy to listen to if you're into that kind of stuff. Mass Murderer also gets a shout out because of its disgusting lyrics. Kinda reminds me of the type of stuff that James Rolfe would say in the Angry Video Game Nerd series.
I got real mad, took a butcher knife and started playing Chuck up a bitch ass. You wanna jump, don't jump to this. Fucking with a nigga that was born swimming in gold piss.
Another notable thing to note is that the track Funky Dope Shit steals its instrumental from Ice Cube's Today Was a Good Day. And when I mean steal, they literally stole it without changing the beat whatsoever. Overall, this tape is okay, but it definitely blends together with some of the other sigils, if that makes any sense. If you like early vaporwave, I can definitely see you liking this, due to the repetitive use of samples. But other than that, it's nothing special in my eyes, especially when compared to some of the other tapes. Our next tape is Lil Ramsey's 1994 album Going Undercover. Lil Ramsey sadly passed away in 2020 due to a car accident, so rest in peace as always. The album was produced by Tommy Wright III, so it's got that going for it. Again, I don't think I have anything unique to say about this album that I haven't said for the others. Honestly, I think I'm already running out of stuff to say. There's some interesting use of samples here and there, and songs like Hoes Sucking Dick and Losing My Mind genuinely have some creepy beats, and others like Writing with the Pistol Grip and Game Fucked Up have some great storytelling about murder and satanic stuff. but again, a lot of it just blends in with the other sigils.
Trying to get a grip, but still I'm changing with a quick click. Mentally insane, having visions of a bloody beast.
The only other thing to mention is that the track Bitches the Hold Up features a verse by Tommy Wright III, where he again shouts out the four corners, which keep that in mind for later as always.
Tommy, he got that gas. The Ramsey gon' load that house.
Oh, and the track Losing My Mind also has a sample from R. Kelly's Bump and Grind, which surprisingly fits the song rather well. Overall, this one is okay. I do think it's good, but it doesn't quite exemplify the concept of the sigils the same way that the previous ones do. But still, it definitely can be considered part of the sigils. One last thing to mention about this album is that the album cover is hilarious. The original tape never had a cover, so the covers that you see online for this tape are presumably made by fans. One of them shows a badly cut out PNG of Ramsey in a red tinted jail or a boiler room or something like that, and the other shows his eyes superimposed on a tornado. Again, it's so bad it's good, but these covers do kind of fit the vibe of the tape. Okay, so our next album is H.O.H's 1995 album, Living in a Casket. First off, the tape cover is amazing. It definitely has that creepy vibe plastered all over it. From the grainy photo of the cemetery to the cliche font, everything is really good and delightfully cheesy. I do wish I could say the same for the album though, as the creepiness ends after the intro track. But again, I'd say that this album is actually the best out of all the sigils on an objective scale, as this album is nothing but bangers track after track. The songs take a lot of influence from West Coast G-Funk, with the synths in the background, and old southern trap music with the drum patterns, so it gives this album an original feel compared to the other sigils, which mostly all follow in the footsteps of Memphis hip-hop of the era. Unlike the other tapes, the production levels are top notch, and sounds amazing for an independent hip hop tape made in the 90s, as the production of all the tracks sound professionally mastered and the beats hardly feel repetitive. You may say that this takes away from the sigils, and I definitely agree, but honestly this album is just so fire you hardly notice that it isn't even scary or haunted in the slightest, aside from some lyrics I guess. Overall, though this album is hardly part of the sigils in general, I still think that this is the best in terms of its production and lyrics. If you want an obscure fire-ass trap album from back in the day, then I would highly suggest that you check this one out. It's truly an obscure classic by all definitions. Okay, so our next tape is NOD's self-titled 1996 album, N-Words of Destruction. Unlike Living in a Casket, this album is more what you expect from the sigils, in both its low quality and creepy production to its distinct Memphis sound. Everything about this album screams the Memphis Rap Sigils. Again, we got Tommy Wright III producing some of the tracks, so it's got his style written all over the project, aside from some of the beats being creepy and your occasional horror reference. Like the obvious Nightmare on Elm Street reference on the track Tinimaine, I would hardly call this tape scary, though I will say that the album does become creepier as the tracks go on, with the track N-Words of Destruction probably being the spookiest, due to its piano in the background and the pitch-shifted vocals. Some of the lyrics are very descriptive when it comes to the ways that the group describes their murderous ways, but again, this is a pretty common theme in all the sigils, so there's nothing really special. It's still pretty decent though, with my favorite tracks being Fuck the World, Bud Keep Feeding Part 3, and Fugitive, as the beats and flow with the lyrics and instrumentals are pretty solid overall. Another thing to note is that this project is pretty short, as there's only 6 songs spanning nearly 32 minutes, and the track Fugitive lasts almost 10 minutes, probably due to the multiple different verses on the track, as well as the shoutouts. The last thing to mention would be the tape cover, as again, this one also fits perfectly well within the vibe of the previous Sigil tapes, as well as fitting the album well as well. You can't even see the group's face because of how crushed the blacks are in this photo. Now that I think about it, it kind of reminds me of that one Vine, you know the one I'm talking about. But again, I think the cover's charm works in favor of the tape. Overall, this is a good one. Nothing particularly special in the beginning, but it does have some spooky stuff later on. I'd recommend it for this Halloween if you have time.
My nigga Zert. We gon' make it, my nigga, one way or another.
Our next tape is Mr. Tinimaine's 1995 album 1995. First of all, we gotta talk about this cover because it is fucking legendary. We got like the red lightning shooting out the sky, we got a badly cut out PNG of Mr. Tinimaine, we got another badly cut out PNG of Tini, although I can't tell if it's supposed to be him or Suge Knight, and of course we got a transparent leprechaun from the infamous slasher film franchise. Specifically, it's from the poster of Leprechaun Back to the Hood. The pyramid on the cover is of course the Memphis Pyramid, and this iconography is going to show up later in further conspiracies about the sigils. So like the Four Corners, keep this in mind for later. Anyways, this cover is fucking legendary. It's so bad that it's good. Kind of reminds me of a Viper album, but also this was probably a fan-made cover, as the original 1995 cassette was just blank, and further reissues of the album have different covers, like the re-released 2020 cassette by SIC Records. Aside from the cover, I'd actually say that this is the scariest sigil since Children of the Corn's The Single. Like The Single, 1995's creepiness comes from its low quality production, repetitive beats, and creepy samples.
What am I gonna do? Thought I lost my mind. It was so much blood dripping. Halloween night, I almost died on the stretcher. Doctor said I wasn't gonna make it. He ain't God, I'm unconscious, but I hear them bitches screaming. Help them loud.
The creepiest track to me are Voices in My Head, Crept In I Came, Anna Make the World Go, and Lay It Down, as all these just have this great creepy vibe to them. My favorite track in the album overall is actually the chillest out of all of them, that being Last Man Standing, which has a soothing instrumental throughout. There's not much new I can say about this tape that I haven't said for the single, but my general recommendation for this tape is that if you like the single, then you'll probably enjoy this one too. Overall, 1995 is one of the creepier tapes out of all the sigils. So if you want more haunting vibes that the single brought you, then I suggest checking out this one as well. But in my opinion, it's nowhere near as good or as creepy as the single.
Oh, I already said, I'm hiding the motherfucker. Fuck that shit, though, you know what I'm saying?
At last, we come to the 8th and final tape of the Memphis Rap Sigils, which is Psycho's 1995 album, The Return of Psycho. First of all, we gotta talk about this cover. This is probably my second favorite cover aside from Maniac's World of a Psycho. I just loved the half-ass attempt to cover up Psycho rising from the grave, with just some dead leaves to cover the rest of his body. That to me just adds to the charm of this project. The back cover is also pretty spooky with the train coming down the tracks. Kinda reminds me of Stand By Me a bit. The cover definitely fits into that creepy vibe of the sigils, as well as the creepy vibes within the tape itself. While I wouldn't consider this tape to be anywhere near as scary as the single or 1995, I would definitely say that this tape does contain some creepy production here and there.
Manipulating people that are lame to this game by selling your dreams to your fortune and your fame. Yeah, I promise to make you rich. Just run a couple of tricks. Invest into my company, then we'll live legit.
The tape balances making straight bangers out of the tracks, without forgetting the creepy production that comes with the horror elements associated with these tapes.
This is how we bless, kicking it when we smoke, we smoke, we smoke. This weed got me drunk. This is how we bless, kicking it when we smoke, we smoke, we smoke. This weed got me drunk. It's the
I particularly really like the use of samples on tracks like N-Words I Fuck With, PIMP, The Smell of the Smoke, and Undercover Cop.
walking out my house onto the cut with the 4-5 in the small of my back because my holster hurts my damn side. Caught up with my roadies on the corner doing the same thing. Reaching to my brief to get the bricks, you know, of cocaine.
I wouldn't necessarily call anything in this tape particularly disturbing in either its lyrics or beats, but it does fit the overall vibe of the singles in question. Overall, this one is pretty good. I'd recommend it, but it's not the one I would immediately recommend if you're getting into the Sigils. So yeah, that's all 8 tapes of the Memphis Rap Sigils. Some of them were pretty spooky, and others were straight up bangers. But remember how I said to keep 2 things in mind when going through these tapes? Which were the 4 Corners and the Memphis Pyramid. We'll start with the 4 Corners first. The 4 Corners was a location that was a regular name drop by Tommy Wright III, and many of the tracks that he either produced or appeared on, most notably naming the previously mentioned 4 Corners Part 3. I'll just let this anonymous 4chan poster explain his theory on the whole thing. I should probably add about Tommy Wright in the 4 Corners. And many of Tommy's tracks or tracks he's produced, he has references to the 4 Corners. In interviews, he stated that the 4 Corners was a place which he and his friends hung out at. It was somewhere in Whitehaven, Memphis. When described, the location takes up around 5 blocks, with most of it being suburbs or main streets. I want to take another look at the possible meaning for the 4 Corners. A crossroad, for instance, has 4 corners. I've heard some references to this and the West Memphis 3, but that road is a little obvious. I will, however, mention that Tommy's 4 Corner references began in 1993, shortly after the West Memphis 3. 4 Corners could also be seen in regards to Ezekiel 7:2, which is often used for reference to the hour of doom in the Bible, the coming of the end. Demons like Kalfu or Murmur are also known to travel the crossroads, and offer deals in exchange for worship. Some claim that's whose juice or alcohol was in contact. So we got that concept out of the way, now let's get to the Memphis Pyramid. The structure was originally built in 1991, and was an arena structure that held sporting and entertainment events before closing in 2004. In 2005, Bass Pro Shops bought the venue, and reopened it in 2015 as the Bass Pro Shops Megastore, which included a shopping center, a hotel, restaurants, a bowling alley, and even an archery range. Many say that because the pyramid was built in the 90s Memphis, that it is haunted or has some kind of power, or something like that. The Egyptian symbolism of using a pyramid as the structure also ties into where Memphis, Tennessee got its name from, which was of course derived from the city of Memphis in Egypt. The Egyptian symbolism of the sigils is also said to play a role in the powers that lie within them, and is a constant theme in the conspiracy theories around the sigils. And if I were to get into all the mythology and religion behind it, this video would probably be twice as long. Apparently it has something to do with the creator god Ptah or some shit, but I really don't know. According to this 4chan poster, 3-6 Mafia member Kupsa Kaneka reportedly once said that he ran into a violent cult ritual committed by Memphis elites when he was a teenager, and the black-robed individuals who wielded a metal box containing a crystal skull to the top of the Memphis pyramids in 1990. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. I tried to find this interview to the best of my ability, but I couldn't find it. But I did find another one very similar to it, which I promised to get to at the end of this video, because to me it's really interesting. Apparently there's some conspiracies also having something to do with giant demons living under the Appalachians, because Memphis is close to them or something, I don't fucking know. Another theory about these tapes is that they don't work if you play them online, as they only work if you have the original cassette tapes. Other theories say that you need to have all 8 of the tapes to unleash the powers within them, so it's sort of like some satanic version of collecting all the Dragon Balls. And if you want to try this out for yourself, then good luck, because these tapes are pretty pricey right now. The last wacky conspiracy that I have for you regarding the sigils is that a satanic sacrifice in Florida was committed by some of the creators of the sigils, or at least according to this random ass YouTube comment they are. I couldn't find much on this, except the 1989 story about 2 victims getting their hearts cut out and stolen during a sacrifice, but that's about it. Some even go as far to say that one of these groups, whether it be Children of the Corn or H.O.H. or N.O.D. or even the 3-6 Mafia, were the actual ones who committed the West Memphis 3 murders. Because if you remember, they never actually caught the perpetrators. But for now, that's all the conspiracy theories behind the Memphis Rap Sigils. But as you can all probably tell, they're pretty far-fetched, laughable, and outright stupid. So what really is the true story behind these tapes? Well, the truth is that all the supernatural, sacrificial, and satanic origins of all these tapes is most likely a crock of shit. At the end of the day, there's no proof that any of these artists were involved in any type of sacrifice or occult-like behavior when making these tapes, as the most common explanation for this is that all the horror imagery was just there for aesthetic purposes and shock value. At the end of the day, everyone from the rappers who made these tapes to the conspiracy theorists on 4chan all do this in good fun. They know it's all fake. But like all the great goofy pop culture conspiracies, treating these wacky theories as fact is our way of showing love for them. All these tapes came out around the same time as the mid-90s. 1994, 5, and 6 to be exact. And around that time, Memphis rap was starting to truly make a name for itself, mostly thanks to the 3-6 Mafia dropping their debut studio album Mystic Styles, a landmark achievement for the Memphis rap community, and one of the best examples of the genre of horrorcore and hip-hop. Horrorcore is a subgenre of hip-hop that relies heavily on horror iconography and expressions to convey its themes, lyrics, and instrumentals, which is what all the previous tapes I just discussed did. These artists use horror imagery to convey the inner horrors that were occurring in their own lives. Remember, Memphis was one of the biggest murder capitals in the country at the time, and these artists were just putting their fears and anxieties out in the open, only for us as the listeners to misconstrue it. At the end of the day, it's just an aesthetic and a genre, and these tapes did a pretty damn good job of convincing people otherwise. It sort of reminds me of how people thought that Cannibal Holocaust or the Blair Witch Project were real, except those are mostly well known while these tapes are way more obscure. To quote the AV Club article covering the sigils, written by Katie Riff, the most likely explanation is that the Memphis Rap Sigils are the online manifestation of the base human tendency to take something unfamiliar, something other, and reframe it in supernatural terms. Compare it to another Memphis phenomenon, the so-called Voodoo Village, in the southwest part of town. Visiting this old homestead late at night and running away giggling was once a rite of passage for Memphis teenagers. But in reality, it was nothing more than the home of a soft-spoken, reclusive black artist named Washington James Harris. Harris expresses the unique personal beliefs his father taught him, a combination of Christianity, Masonic lore, through folk art, which is why his yard is covered in wooden crosses and stars. But none of the teenagers ever stopped to ask him that, which is why, as of this writing, he's put up a fence. To further quote the article, she also writes, "All of them use Satan and the devil as metaphors for depression, anxiety, and the stress of life in the city. As Memphis producer Lil Grimm once said in 2017, we were just talking about the inside struggle. We were trying to figure out what life was about. We didn't even know what we were doing. We were just making music for the hood and trying to heal ourselves." Even on 4chan, most know that the Memphis horrorcore is just scary fun. Like the poster who wrote in May 2018. None of them were actually into it, they just like the aesthetic. I'm exactly the same way myself, not saying it's a bad thing. But none of these dudes were actually out here worshipping Satan. It's just a look. This sort of demonic-like imagery allegations has always been attributed to rock and roll, at least going back to the 50s and 60s. So it's all but natural that hip-hop is getting the same treatment after all this time. The concept of a demonic sacrifice is nothing new when it comes to music. Whether you believe in the 27 Club or the story of Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil. Memphis is also no stranger to conspiracies, whether it be the already mentioned West Memphis 3, to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., to the ancient Egyptian stuff for which the city of Memphis gets its name from. Anyways, the Sigils have become extremely popular within not only conspiracy boards and hip-hop related forums, but also just people who in general are into obscure creepy stuff as well. YouTubers like Tuv, Wendigoon, and Trappler Ross have covered the topic of the Sigils in some of their videos, exposing the story of these tapes to thousands on the internet. Tuv's video in particular boosted the exposure of the Sigils to new heights never before seen, at least according to Google Trends. This could also be attributed to a viral TikTok video breaking down the concept of the Sigils, which inspired Tuv to make the video in the first place. Tuv's video specifically covered the concept of rap.mp3, which in and of itself is a whole nother can of worms. But basically, both this theory and the Sigils are highly connected because of the misconception that they are related. Rap.mp3 is another theory that there's an mp3 file of the same name that has cryptic clues on the whereabouts on a missing kid. Personally, the first time I ever heard of the Sigils was in the infamous hip-hop conspiracy iceberg chart, with this topic being listed on the 3rd tier of the chart. This means that me and many others discovered the Sigils in mid-2020, which was when iceberg charts were starting to blow up. This later led me to this post by the X-Files of rap music, detailing the complete origin of the tapes, which was used as my primary resource for this video, so go check them out for more awesome articles, or see Trappler Ross's complete breakdown on the iceberg chart. At the end of the day, who knows if these tapes are haunted or not, and at the end of the day, who the hell cares? Hopefully I succeeded in creeping you out for this Halloween, and if not, then hopefully you enjoyed this video. So have a happy Halloween, stay safe, and I hope to see you again next year. But one more thing. So you know that video of Coops the Kanika that I thought was interesting? Well, I guess now it's time to talk about it. So in 2012, this little documentary was posted to Coops the Kanika's old channel. I don't know if it was an official channel from him or if it was just a fan, but regardless, this video was released in 2012. Anyways, this documentary is sort of like him telling his backstory in terms of the Memphis rap game, and his involvement in the 3-6 Mafia. And it's pretty interesting if you're into that stuff. But this documentary also covers Coop's theories on the supernatural, occult stuff, and the New World Order. Specifically, the clip that I want to show you from this documentary is one where Kanika recalls one of his direct experiences with discovering some occult-like shit. The specific event happened when the group was shooting the iconic cover for Mystic Styles, which shows Kanika held up on a cross. While shooting this cover, they noticed people in an abandoned warehouse doing some occult-like shit, so I guess I should just play the clip.
We went downtown to do an album cover for Mystic Styles, and you know me, of course, I'm so with the shit. I got on the guy, that's me on the cross. Just me, Paul Lord, and Juice with Crunch on there. He wasn't there, he wasn't part of the group, you know, Boo hadn't been across yet, and all them other guys. While down there, it's a building. It's called a factory something, but right now it's on Riverside somewhere. All them houses up on Riverside and shit. It's a warehouse. We ran across some shit we weren't looking for. While at the same time we heard 666, but then we realized there's some real shit going on. It was actually motherfuckers in this building with the little robes and shit on, little altar up on that motherfucking, looking in that motherfucker. So, you know, we got caught down there. They made us watch. So, you know, we leaving. Well, that was the second time. The first time police would put up like, Memphis police said, y'all shouldn't be down here. So that let me know right then it was some shit going on in this world, in this city by rich folks and politicians that's in this shit. And this shit is really serious.
The interview goes on, and again, it's pretty interesting if you're into conspiracy theories. He even goes on to claiming that he saw a UFO in the sky once, So yeah, this interview is full of gems like that. Rest in peace to Kanika as well as Lord Infamous as always. Anyways, the last clip that I'm going to show for you today, and I promise that this is going to be the last clip, I swear, is this clip of the classic MTV prank show Punk'd, in which DJ Paul of the 3 6 Mafia is pranked by Ashton Kutcher and Juicy J. Usually this is pretty common in a show like this, but the way they prank him isn't. Very few pranks on the show, lest I recall, were centered around horror, but this one was. So the prank essentially is that DJ Paul and Juicy J are invited to a meeting with this producer and his family. But this family also happens to be pretty weird. The family is super spiritual, right down to their clothes, the candles all over the place, the weird prayers, the weird son, the incestuous relationship between the brother and sister, and overall this family is definitely exhibiting some occult-like behaviors. Anyways, they do another prayer and then this happens.
Get out! Hey man, I'm sorry, man. Okay, get that thing off Dad. Get him off Dad. Okay. All right. Get it off Dad. Get Dad off it. Just put it down. What happened? Who did this? What happened? Hey, look, man. What happened? Hey, man. Guys, I need some answers. I got my 5 hands. It's a normal.
That's a pretty specific prank if I've ever seen one, given the history and symbolism that the 3 6 Mafia always talk about in their music, and what Kanika said in the previous interview. Coincidence? I think not, but at the end of the day it's probably just Juicy J fucking with DJ Paul, by knowing what scares him and such. Anyways, that's my classic 4x3 Halloween special for this year, and this is the true end of the video, I promise. Next time I might do a video on the original Poltergeist, and all the mysteries surrounding that film, so stay tuned for that one next year. So I hope you enjoyed this video and have a great day. Have a great Halloween, whatever, just have a good one.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.